27% of that Gallup poll respondents said the results of the election frightened them. Some of that fear is perhaps related to disagreement with President Obama's policies or related concerns. But for some small segment, perhaps like those involved in the campus incidents, the fear may be related to an unvoiced and maybe even unconscious recognition that the racial calculus of our society has been changed by the election, a change that threatens the position of privilege white people have occupied for so long. Such a sense of threat can lead to irrational, potentially violent behavior. And of course, the fear of such violence is underscored by the not-so-distant history of brutality and murder which accompanied the struggle for civil rights, including voting rights, in our nation. Such acts are like severe birthing pains, painful contractions which no one wants, yet they are signs of something new emerging. Certainly, the election of 2008 changed a fundamental narrative in American culture. That narrative has been replayed on television and in movies and in politics throughout all of our lives. It can be summed up in this way. In a heroic struggle, after all the twists and turns of the plot line, the white guy, usually the blonde, wins. The black guy, if there is one, is usually eliminated from the story before the end. You've seen that movie, haven't you? You know that plot line. But today, the story has a new ending. We can no longer predict the winner based on race, and perhaps soon not even on gender. The election of 2008 and the victory of Barack Obama mean that anyone with talent, drive, and a great game plan can win. That new possibility makes for a much better story and a much better society. Yet, as we collectively get used to the new narrative, how should we respond to what I interpret as campus and community expressions of fear? We need to seize the teachable moment, illuminate the pattern of violence associated with movements of social change, so when incidents threatening in tone and content occur, they can be understood by all in a meaningful social and historical context. We need to maintain a posture in which hateful incidents are never allowed to take place unchallenged, and provide opportunities for more speech, more dialogue about how various groups of students are experiencing the social changes we are all witnessing. We need to lift up the power of cross-racial coalitions, a power we have just witnessed in the election of Barack Obama. We should not rush past the significance of the great example of effective team building across lines of difference that we have just witnessed. It is a powerful example of 21st century leadership, one too rarely seen in our history, but essential for our future. We should use it fully as a model for our students as well as for ourselves. Something new was born on election night. We have the responsibility and opportunity to nurture it on our campuses and in our communities. Now that is where the essay ends, but I want to repeat the closing lines. Something new was born on election night. We have the responsibility and opportunity to nurture it on our campuses, and let me add here, in our workplaces and in our communities. So how do we do that? Are we in a post-racial society? My essay would suggest that we are not. The threats against Mr. Obama by white supremacist groups would suggest that we are not. But has our society changed? Absolutely. Throughout history, there are examples of cross-racial coalitions that were formed and then driven asunder by the politics of fear, the use of racial animosity and fear of the other to divide and conquer. But in the words of Mr. Obama, not this time. Hope conquered fear. Economic self-interest conquered racial anxiety. Are we there yet, a truly post-racial society? I don't think so. But consider this piece of personal history. I was born in Tallahassee, Florida in 1954, the year of Brown versus Topeka Board of Education. That Brown ruling actually occurred May 17th, 1954, just a few days ago, would mark the anniversary. Despite the Brown ruling in 1954, I was born in September 1954, despite that ruling, segregation was still the rule of the day in Florida. And my father, who was an art professor at Florida A&M, a historically black university in Tallahassee, was not able to pursue his doctorate at Florida State University, just 10 minutes away from where he worked. My dad had a bachelor's degree in art from Howard University and a master's degree from the University of Iowa. But in 1954, he could not earn his doctorate at Florida State University because he was African American. The state of Florida complied with the Brown Supreme Court ruling not by allowing admission to Florida State, but by paying my father's transportation to Pennsylvania, where he earned his doctorate at Penn State. Once he completed his degree, needless to say, he was not that interested in returning to Florida. My parents escaped the segregation of the South and moved to Massachusetts in 1958, where I grew up. But let's fast forward 54 years to November 2008. The state of Florida votes for Barack Obama. That, ladies and gentlemen, is indeed change. Or consider this. In September 2008, I visited an independent school outside Philadelphia, where I spoke to a group of teachers as well as an assembly of students. The teachers, like me, were quite aware of the historic magnitude of this election. The students, all born in 1990 or later, had a different view. When I asked how many of them thought it was especially significant that either an African American or a woman would be elected as president or vice president, respectively, only a handful raised their hands. They pretty much took this as nothing so special. They have grown up in a world where they have seen Condoleezza Rice as Secretary of State and Ken Chenault as president of American Express, and the civil rights era of 1950s and the 1960s is at least one, maybe two generations before they were even born. Now they have seen Sonia Sotomayor confirmed as a Supreme Court justice. That is very different from what those of us in the room of the baby boomer generation saw growing up. And it calls me to remind you that in our society today, we have at least 6 living generations right now, each representing a different set of social and historical circumstances. Think about what each of these generations learned growing up about race. There is the so-called lost generation, of which there are very few still living, but some. And if you have any relatives 100 years old, you know they came of age during World War I and Prohibition. And it was a time of deeply entrenched patterns of segregation, not just in the South, but all over the country, including here in Michigan. Then there are the GIs, the ones that Tom Brokaw called the greatest generation. They were the heroes of World War II and the New Deal, men and women who are now in their 80s and 90s. This is my parents' generation, who also grew up with segregation, but they were also the civil rights pioneers, the generation of Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. And because we, as a nation, are not very good students of history, we don't necessarily know all of the ways or remember all of the ways that race shaped their futures. We don't remember the racial struggles around the decisions about the implementation of Social Security and the ways in which domestic workers and agricultural workers were specifically left out of coverage by Social Security. We don't remember the ways in which the GI Bill and the access to homes, purchase of homes, was determined by racial covenants built into those neighborhoods and the bills being allowed for new construction, not for older homes, et cetera. We don't remember necessarily the ways in which white privilege was really woven right in to many of the policies impacting the lives of these different generations.